Towns and cities play an enormous and fundamental role in sustainability. In livable cities is preservation of the wild, is one way to put it. Some decades ago, the planning approach that was used led to a phenomenon that's now known as sprawl. And it was based on single-use zoning. And the idea there was there were industries that polluted the air and the water, and there were places where people lived. And planners wanted to keep the industries separate from where people lived. So there were separate zones. There was an industrial zone, a commercial zone, a residential zone, and so forth. So that was okay, but what it led to was dependency on automobiles and this low-density land use, all of which is now known as sprawl. And as you can see here in this example from Las Vegas, non-grid street patterns, these loopy places where you can only get someplace by driving. And depending on cars leads to a bunch of problems, not only consuming huge amounts of land, but the cars emit greenhouse gases and pollution, and then having to drive everywhere leads to health problems in humans, including obesity from lack of exercise and social isolation. There are various planning tools that planners can use. And one primary goal of land use planning is to protect farmland where we grow the food that cities will need and increasingly need in the future. One approach is the urban growth boundary. This approach was actually developed in the state of Oregon in 1973 with Senate Bill 100, which mandates that every city or municipality in Oregon must have a plan, and it must establish an urban growth boundary. And if your city is going to grow, you have to grow inside that boundary. You can't sprawl out into the farmlands and destroy the agricultural land. A similar approach has to do with clustered development. So what we see on the lower right here is a development where the houses are clustered in one area and the open space is preserved in another area. A third idea has to do with developing on brownfields. A brownfield is land that has previously been developed upon, usually industrial or commercial. That's a good candidate for rebuilding. A greenfield is farmland or forest land or prairie land. It's land that has not been developed on, and we try to avoid developing on greenfield. LEED for Cities certification looks to these approaches for urban planning. Mixed use, compact spaces that are walkable. Mixed use means you have a number of uses mixed into the same neighborhood. So where you live, you can also find your school, places where you need to shop, places to buy food, places for recreation and entertainment. You can get there by walking often. You don't need to drive huge distances. And that means probably you can find jobs in that mixed-use neighborhood. And one common arrangement is to find commercial space on the ground floor, like we see here in these two examples, and then living spaces on the upper floors. This all means that you will be driving your car less to go meet your daily needs because you can walk to the neighborhood store. It also means that you're more likely to have social equity, that is, a mix of incomes and ethnic groups and ability groups and educational groups, a mix of people all together. And because the space is lively, it's not just an industrial zone that closes down at night. It's not just houses where people shut their doors at night, but it's got a bunch of uses so the space stays lively day and night. And that means you have eyes on the street, and that means crime prevention. So places with mixed use, crime prevention through environmental design is a field of study, and we now know that eyes on the street reduce crime. A city that is compact has several benefits. It is walkable, so you can go from the place where you live to things that you need by walking. You're more likely to have small local businesses in your neighborhood, which is good for you. You can walk to them, and it's good for business owners. They have business. Compact densification is also important in order to support public transportation, and that's why the LEED for Cities certification requires at least 7 dwelling units per acre, and they could be houses or condos or apartments, but that is the minimum that you need in order to make public transportation viable. It would be nice to have light rail everywhere, but research shows that you need at least 15 to 20 dwelling units per acre to make light rail viable. You see light rail in Denver, Colorado, and Portland, Oregon, because they have those kinds of density. And then walkable neighborhoods, which come about through mixed use and being compact, but also by the way the spaces are designed. Walkable neighborhoods are accessible for a whole diverse range of people. People who are too young to have a car, people who are too old to drive, people who have disabilities that mean they can't drive. All these people can walk to where they need to go. All of this means, of course, that you need to drive, you have fewer car trips, so that's better for safety, it's better for greenhouse gas emissions and pollution. Walkable neighborhoods are also healthier. People are getting out and moving around, and they're also socially healthier. So people begin to form communities. They get to know their neighbors. They stop and chat. Look here, there are benches, there are places to sit. A walkable neighborhood has a radius of about 1/4 of a mile, or a diameter of about 1/2 a mile. That's a walkable distance. It has networks of interconnected streets, so you don't have to drive everywhere. You can walk easily to the mixed uses you're going to, and public transportation can get in there easily. Cities that have mixed-use, compact, walkable neighborhoods often have design guidelines. The city of Portland does, for example, and it says that you should have building fronts that are part of the street space that are human in scale. So not big, massive blank walls that loom over everyone, but these human scale spaces where people feel comfortable walking. Portland, Oregon is a prime example of all of the things we've just been talking about. And if you read urban planning books, which I like to do, many urban planning books will point to Portland, Oregon as an example of how to do it. They'll talk about some principle and then they'll say, Portland, for example. We are really lucky to have this city as an exemplar nearby. Building a resilient community is going to be increasingly important in the increasingly hot, destabilized climate that lies ahead. And one way to build community is to have walkable streets where you have places to sit, places to gather, places where you run into neighbors and have spontaneous conversations. An approach to urban planning that has all of these features is known as smart growth. Smart growth was developed a few decades ago by the governor of Maryland, Paris Glendening, and it has compact, walkable neighborhoods with public transportation, with a mix of uses. These are the principles of smart growth, and you'll see all these things we've been talking about: mixed use, compact, diverse range, walkability, and some other things. Participation by the people who live there, diverse, affordable housing that everyone can live in. Another approach to urban planning that's similar to smart growth is new urbanism, and it's promoted by architects and planners in an organization called the Congress for New Urbanism, but it has basically the same ideas: compact, mixed use, walkable, transit-oriented, human scale. We have talked before in an earlier lecture about Mole Hill, this neighborhood in Vancouver. I just bring it up again as an example of another way to approach affordable, walkable housing with community spaces. In a city, infrastructure is the technical systems that lie under the city and that make everything possible. Infra is a word that means under. So infrastructure includes plumbing pipes, electrical wiring, telecommunication, all that kind of thing is infrastructure. When open space is used to provide services, we call that green infrastructure. And green infrastructure provides what we call ecosystem services, those services that infrastructure provides that come from these natural settings, including flood control and management of stormwater. You sometimes see linear green infrastructure, and that might be called greenways. Here's an example of greenways. This is from the Rails to Trails Conservancy, a project that converts abandoned railroad trails to paths through habitat. A couple of examples from around the world. This is in Seoul, South Korea. The picture on the left shows what this river used to look like. This river was buried beneath 10 lanes of freeway, and you can see it there. In, I think it was 2001, some political changes happened in Seoul. There was a new mayor, and opinions started to shift, and for one reason and another, they were able to remove that freeway, to daylight this river, that is, to bring it up to the surface, and to recreate it, and now it's like a central park for Seoul. Here's another one I think we've seen before, the Kalong River in Singapore. This is Bishan Park, that has been converted from a concrete drainage channel to a beautiful park full of wildlife. Finally, cities need to plan for how they will handle climate change. And so you find almost every town and city and college preparing a climate action plan that deals with mitigation, how to reduce climate change, and adaptation, how to adapt to the changes that are already here. Climate action planning.